Hey there everybody, it's Steve the Amateur Historian here at 2nd and Yamhill, and it's actually pretty quiet around here. There's usually a lot of chaos happening in this area, but right now it's pretty quiet. And it's a perfect time, I think, to bring you a new, going way back to 1880. I think it's 1880. This is a real old one. This is a new episode of Historic Murders of Portland. So, as I said, this case is going back a long ways. We're going back to 1880. And even though we're right at the heart of the Yamhill Historic District, I don't really think... you go down a block, there were buildings from the late 1870s that would have been brand new when this happened. But I think this building's from 1890, Willamette Block over here is from 1882. I know there's another building over there that's fairly old, and... this building, I always just call it the Moy building because of the marker up here. I think this definitely wasn't around in 1890, so it wasn't here. It's still a fairly old building, but by the description of the story, two men went into a place called the Diana Saloon, which was located on Yamhill, which is this street. It's not really a street anymore, it's Max Tracks, between 2nd Avenue and 3rd Avenue, and I gotta make sure what side of the street. It was on the south side of the street. That's what I thought, because I said it was probably in the vicinity of where this building, which I think is like an old furniture store building, I could be wrong, where that building and the Moy meet, kind of right here in the middle. That's probably about where this saloon was. Like, it was dead center in the middle of Yamhill between 2nd and 3rd. And there was a guy named J.H. Kelly who went to the saloon that was located here with a guy named James Rollins. And it said in the newspaper, I guess this is just some of that 1880s juiciness, that he was known as Kelly the Vag. As V-A-G, Kelly the Vag. Not the Vig, the Vag. So, these guys had been just kind of perusing all over Portland. They actually started a ways north of here, and we're hitting up a few spots and just getting themselves nice and toasty, real good and drunk. And they'd already been to like 2 or 3 other saloons before they made it down here, more kind of to the central part of downtown Portland, and the Diana Saloon, that again would have kind of been right here. And they're real drunk, but it's 1880, so no one's gonna stop you most of the time when you get nice and drunk. And these two guys who've they've been just laughing it up and having a good time all night, they suddenly end up having a bit of a argument. And so that initial argument sparked into this fight over how they should divvy up money. Apparently they had robbed a guy together. They just collectively robbed a guy, and they were having an argument over how they should split that money, because that's how cases like that always happen. It's just, you start arguing about money and the next thing you know, someone dies. So Rollins gets pissed and storms out. Kelly stays in the joint for just a little bit longer, and Rollins is just out in the street here. He's pissed. He's ready to fight. They're both drunk as hell, so they are not of sound body or mind. And he's just standing out here, waiting. And then finally, you know, if this subway door is the door to exit the Diana Saloon, it was probably pretty close to that, Kelly the Vag comes out, and right out on the street here, without a moment's hesitation, Rollins comes up and just jabs a knife into him. Just stabs him to death right in the, you know, I mean, this was a, you know, it's hopping today because there's a lot of people, but even back in 1880, there was a lot of people here. He just stabs him, and Kelly drops dead right down here on the sidewalk. He's picked up by authorities. You know, they try to rush him to get him care, but he was long gone. And Rollins, who would be apprehended a short while later and apparently would be in a very jovial mood, apparently not really understanding what he had just done here, they said he took off running down 2nd. So from the vicinity of the saloon, he would have started running this way and to 2nd here and around this corner. So coming down to 2nd here, he would have started running off in this direction. And as Rollins fled along 2nd here, he encountered a fellow named Frank Clifford, who had witnessed what had just happened, and he tried to stop him, but Rollins had a knife, and he had just shown that he was not afraid to use it. So he waved the knife in front of Clifford's face. Clifford kind of stepped out of his way, and Rollins just continued his sprint going down 2nd. And I want to say he probably made it all the way to Stark, which is now called Harvey Milk Street. But I think he made it. He stayed along 2nd Avenue here till he got to Stark Street, and then turned to the left or east. Now, it's not absolutely certain whether this happened or where exactly in the course of events this happened, but at some time, it was at roughly 10 p.m. and the stabbing of Kelly happened at 9:30. So within the half hour, apparently a man named Auguste Leclerc, and to make sure I said that right, Auguste Leclerc had encountered Rollins in another saloon. Like, Rollins had just stumbled into another place for yet another drink. And he said that they sat and drank for a while, and Rollins admitted to Leclerc that he had just had a fight with someone. And having heard, about this stabbing that had just occurred, Leclerc asked him, "Oh, are you talking about that guy that was, stabbed out in front of the Diana Saloon?" And all of the sudden, Rollins snaps. He acts like they're old buddies and all that stuff. And then he suddenly snaps and lurches forward to Leclerc and says, "If you say anything, I'll, cut your guts out." Something really dark like that. And then took off. And I'm not sure exactly when that happened, but at some point, he most likely would have been at this intersection, which is 2nd and what would have been Stark back then, but is now 2nd and Harvey Milk. And he probably would have gone this direction. So regardless when exactly the Leclerc encounter happened, during this time, the reason I think he would have stayed on 2nd till Stark and then started going this way is because he arrived at the Stark Street Ferry, which would have been right up here. The river is just, past the park here. He would have been going that way. And apparently as he was trying to flee, because again, I guess, you can't judge the guy. He was drunk out of his mind, but as he was going to the Stark Street Ferry, and I'm not going all the way over there because there's 5 homeless people yelling at each other over there. It's not a good position to walk into. But he was running towards the Stark Street Ferry, and he was screaming something like, "Where's the effect of, 'You'll never get me, you'll never catch me,' and just all of this chaos. And the funny thing is, obviously he was planning on, I guess, booking it for the Stark Street Ferry, getting across the river, and I guess thinking because he got to the east side of the river, the police would never get to him. I don't know. And I don't know what the circumstances were. Maybe he didn't have money. He did just rob someone with Kelly. So I don't know. But for whatever reason, he didn't cross the river on the Stark Street Ferry. So I don't know what the circumstances were. And he ends up pretty much in the area that I'm in right now, which is heading into some more parts of Old Town. I love this block that I'm approaching. It also gets a little sketchy at times, but it's got, as I've mentioned in other videos, it has some of the oldest buildings in town, or kind of in the vicinity of this block. But ultimately, I don't know how it happened. He, Rollins, ended up getting from either the saloon he was at with LeClaire or the Star Street Ferry, just a little like block or two over here. He ended up on First Avenue, which is this crossing street. And they said he was found between Oak, which is here, and then Pine, which would be the next street down here. So along this block, he was tracked down. He was probably like drunk as all hell. And you see, like, it's just the max comes through here now, but there's a lot of really old buildings. This building was built, I think, like 1884. This one was built 1889. But yeah, on this block that's actually oddly deserted right now, this is where Rollins was finally tracked down and apprehended for his stabbing. And as I said, you know, when Rollins was initially apprehended, he didn't really have any clue exactly what had happened. He was kind of oblivious to what had gone on, and he was even kind of jovial, and he probably had to come down off all that booze before he realized exactly what he had done and what he was in for in terms of having to pay for what he'd done. And so, with this being a case from 1880, you know, the further back you go, usually, even if you have a database to go through, the harder it is to find information. And I found like 3 actual articles, and then there was a few snippets that were just, you know, 2 or 3 sentences explaining what happened. And of course, the further back you go, the harder it is to find information, and that was very much the case here. I mean, we know what happened, we know who killed who, we know the aftermath, we know where Rollins went, not necessarily in what order, and how he was tracked down and so forth. And you know, this is, as far as I can gather, this is the 3rd oldest case I've covered in this series. So we're going back, not just going back, but going back to like Old West Oregon. The Diana Saloon where they were at was probably some fallen down wood structure. Because aside from this, I know I covered the 1878 murder of Louis Joseph, and the oldest case I've covered is the 1874 murder of Portland police officer Charles Shop. So this is going way back. And pretty much after Rollins was apprehended, you know, he drunkenly said pretty much, I don't really remember what happened, but if I killed him, I mean, I guess I did it. But yeah, he pretty much didn't really have any memory of what he had done. Of course, these guys were drunk as all hell. So whether he was telling the truth or not, that's actually kind of understandable in this regard. So I'm not 100% sure how this all played out. The last little thing I was able to find in terms of timeline, chronology-wise, was a little snippet, you know, like 2 sentences from October 28th, 1880. So this is like several weeks, couple months after the murder itself actually happened. And in essence, all the little snippets said was a jury was unable to reach a decision in regards to how to or whether to sentence Rollins in this case. And one thing I noticed was both these guys apparently had really bad reputations, but Kelly in particular had a really bad reputation. He was constantly getting mixed up with the police. He was constantly getting arrested. He was constantly engaging in petty crime. This guy was not well respected by pretty much anyone in the city. I think even members of the criminal element didn't like this guy. So there was literally, you know, in the articles about him, they said, you know, no big loss that this guy was just shanked out in front of a saloon. So that could have played a role. You know, apparently Rollins was not. I mean, these guys both collectively had robbed a guy right before this happened. So Rollins wasn't a really great guy either, but the guy he killed was someone that nobody really cared for, and that did play a significant role in, you know, way back in the day, old trial proceedings. If the person that got killed was a piece of crap, as far as the general public was concerned, it was almost like you were doing a service for the city, at least in society's eyes. So I could see that being something that affected, you know, a jury not wanting to just give Rollins, you know, life in prison or a death sentence for getting rid of a piece of garbage. But also there, you know, this always, even way back when, always plays into it is the fact that these guys were slobbering drunk. Rollins, so much so that in the aftermath, he stumbled off to another saloon and then apparently crossed the Stark Street Ferry and then came back, and he was just stumbling down a street when he was finally apprehended. I mean, he was gone. So I think that probably played the greatest impact in this overall story, was the fact that he was so drunk. He probably, he didn't seem to have any memory of it, but he probably had no clue at the time exactly what he was doing. Even if he knew he was engaging in physical violence against the guy, he probably didn't realize that what he was doing was actually killing him. At least that's what I take away from this overall thing. So that last little snippet I saw suggests that maybe there was a dismissal at trial, or some situation that would lead to a trial ending, and they might try to retry him later. However, if this jury was so like, we can't sentence this guy, they may have just let him go and said, all right, you're a piece of crap, no second chances for you, but we're gonna let you off on this one because Mr. Kelly was a jerk off, pretty much. So any number of things could have happened, and it's very possible that Rollins could have, in essence, gotten away with it if he was just kind of dismissed at trial and never really tried again. And of course, I found nothing after this to suggest he was retried for this case. So I can only assume that a jury could figure out what to do. They declared a mistrial or possibly dismissed the charges, and that was that. I honestly can't say for certain. It was so long ago and there's so little information out there about this. And that is the case of the murder of Kelly the Vag, as he was known, out in front of the Diana Saloon along Yamhill Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenues back in 1880. So thank you so much, as always, for stopping by, supporting this series that I've been doing for a really long time. Got over 100 episodes done. Thank you for supporting that, supporting this channel, and supporting me. And if you haven't done this yet, you're new to the channel, what have you, remember to like the video, share, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet. Hit up my Patreon. Also, if you haven't done that, I'm trying to post there multiple times a week. A lot of extra content there that you can only access if you become a Patreon supporter. Even if you only give a buck, you'll have access to all that stuff and my friendship for life. The link to that is in the description of this video, as well as the links to my Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and my Reddit subreddit pages. All there for you. And all that said, till next time, this has been Steve, the amateur historian, with another episode of Historic Murders of Portland.